What if we lived in a world where our society was free of judgment? What if those with troubling pasts, unique identities, or a less fortunate upbringing were all treated with the same amount of respect as everyone else? What if we didn't bombard people with mental disorders with stereotypes and stigmas? What if we chose to let live instead of cutting off whoever we see as lesser than ourselves? My name is Emily, and if these questions made you pause and think of a world where those scenarios being possible, then you are on the right track. If not, you have a long way to go. Either way, I'd like you to listen to me with an open mind and an open heart. You will not be sorry if you do so, I guarantee it. Schizophrenia is a chronic brain disorder that affects less than 1% of the United States population. When schizophrenia is active, symptoms can include delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, trouble with thinking, and lack of motivation. The main stigma that is associated with this mental disorder is that whoever has schizophrenia are all a danger to society and should not be let out onto the streets for the public's protection. Though this kind of thinking can be justified by those who are scared of the unknown, it is a very close-minded and selfish way to perceive people with schizophrenia as such without doing proper research. Though there have been several cases of people acting out violently as a result of having schizophrenia, this kind of response is not a symptom of schizophrenia. Therefore, it cannot be directly associated with this mental disorder. When I say that, I'm talking purely based on statistics. Though the numbers waver, studies have shown that the average occurrence of violent behavior resulting from the mental disorder is only 18%. To put this number into perspective, in 2014, within the United States, the number of people diagnosed with schizophrenia was approximately 3.5 million. I will reiterate, that is only 18% of 3.5 million people, and that is only in the United States. In addition, this is only one stigma out of a dozen that have labeled people with schizophrenia. I think it is truly outrageous that we choose to characterize the actions of many by looking at the actions of the few. The news outlets play a major role in stereotyping people to catch headlines. By using cryptic headlines, or those that catch the hearts of readers, be it in a positive or a negative way, can greatly affect the impact information is perceived by the reader. A fine example of this would be the headline that had gone viral in 2018, 10 years after Greyhound beheading, a family of victim and bystanders still suffering. 10 years before this article aired on July 30th, 2008, a man whose name at the time was Vince Lee was sitting beside McLean on the Greyhound when he pulled out a knife and started stabbing McLean repeatedly. This story got pretty graphic, so skipping forward to when it was discovered that Vince Lee, who had just found out he had killed a man, was previously diagnosed with schizophrenia. When diagnosed, the doctors put him on medication. However, there is no cure for this mental illness. In addition, the medication isn't 100% effective. This brings us back to the completely distraught Vince Lee, who now has blood on his hands because he unconsciously forgot to take his medication for a few days prior to the incident. Now, I see no issue with the media disclosing this type of information, giving their audience insight on both sides and how they are both coping with what has happened. That being said, the majority of the articles just capitalized on the family's grief, painting Vince Lee, a man chained by a mental illness, as a menace to society. Although this is a contradicting example, sharing such a gruesome story while advocating for people with schizophrenia, it is exactly for that reason that I chose this to be my exemplar. My fascination with this specific mental illness rooted from the articles I read about Vince Lee, since most of the articles I had read lacked in-depth information about the disease itself. Thus, I was stimulated to do more research on it. As someone who understands both sides of these stories, I feel compelled to speak on behalf of both of them with you. Returning to my original point, the news outlets aren't the only ones at fault when it comes to stereotyping. It is also the ignorance of those who blindly trust in the social media chooses to perceive this mental disorder to be. As children, we were brought up to think silly rumors are not to be spread, and a slap on the wrist would accompany anyone who fed the rumor mill. Yet as we grow up, we believe propaganda and full-heartedly trust in what social media tells us. Were we not all taught to always check the credibility of our sources, to not believe everything we hear? It's so simple yet vetoed when it comes to being faced with stereotypes we read or hear floating around the internet. If you are bombarded with thoughts that could be seen as controversial, you should do your research to make sure what you are thinking is truly the case. Otherwise, you have become the problem. If we all continue to think this way, humanity will become the problem. I could talk about schizophrenia all day, that is no exaggeration. Nonetheless, this mental disorder is not the only one clouded by stigma. I hope this speech has encouraged you the way those articles encouraged me to learn more about any mental illness that intrigues you in any way. Can you now imagine a world much more sensitive than this one? Now I must see that with my own eyes.